Okay, welcome everyone. Great to see you here. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you to everyone who's joining online. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lord Goldsmith, who is UK Minister of State for Asia, Energy, Climate and the Environment. Lord Goldsmith.
Thank you so much. Apologies if people have been kept waiting. That is the nature of COP. So, first of all, welcome to the UK Pavilion. The topic here, as you know, is science and innovation. And in many respects, it is in science and innovation that we find the key to understanding how we're both going to live with and overcome climate change and environmental degradation. And just to give one example, the UK's Future Climate for Africa research program has shown that the devastating megastorms in the Sahel have tripled since the 1980s as a result of climate change. And the information and data that's gathered by the research is now actively being used to protect places and cities like Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso from floods. So somehow we need to find ways to replicate this all around the world so that our scientific understanding of changing weather patterns, and weather is going to change whatever we achieve here at COP27, but we've got to make sure that we are braced and ready so that we can save more lives, help more people to adapt to that inevitable change. And key to that is making the evidence that exists and that we're gathering accessible to everyone, especially to those who are most vulnerable and those worst affected by the devastating impacts of climate change. And in many respects, and in most cases, I would say, that is people on the front line in communities and countries that contributed least, in some cases virtually nothing, to the problem that we're here to address. And that's why our Weather and Climate Information Services, or WISER, program works to ensure the latest weather and climate information is accessible to the most vulnerable in societies around the world. In Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, for example, WISER's worked with communities in informal housing to ensure they receive and use extreme rainfall warnings, which gives them time to, for example, clear drains to stop them overflowing and preventing their homes flooding. Close to 1 million people now, as a result, have better access to actionable weather information. So I'm proud that WISER is now being expanded further across Africa, the Middle East, and across Asia-Pacific regions. And it's programs like this that will enable communities to build resilience that is both equitable and inclusive, helping us to deliver the principles for locally led adaptation, which have been endorsed by now over 80 governments and organizations. Data and evidence clearly has to be coupled with empowerment, otherwise there's no point having that data and information. And it's only by empowering communities and governments to understand and apply the information that they get that will science and tech be able to provide the solutions that we badly need. And that's why the UK's Climate Services for a Net Zero Resilient World program supports research teams in their work with local communities and governments to understand their needs and tailor scientific research to the specific challenges they face. And the program provides a range of services, including data visualization tool that can interpret potential climate impacts to water flows and knock-on impacts to energy infrastructure. And that's key to informing local adaptation planning. It's just one example of how effective application of weather and climate information can have a direct real-world impact on people's lives. And you're going to hear more about that from this brilliant panel here today. And I just finished by saying that to meet the scale of the challenge, and it is a gigantic challenge, we need to share all the examples of best practice we have. And I think that's one of the strengths of COP27 is we're hearing so many good examples of things that are actually working. There are so many partnerships and coalitions that are doing good work, and the Adaptation Research Alliance brings together more than 150 organizations from around the world to speed up innovation and to build community resilience. And the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership provides a platform for climate, humanitarian and development communities to strengthen early action when disasters hit, aiming to make nearly 1 billion people safer from disasters by 2025. Now we're going to hear from the real experts on how this all works, how lives are actually being protected as a consequence of this work. And I hope everyone here will continue to find ways to collaborate and shine the light on those examples which really are working, with a view to then expanding and rolling those examples out. Thank you so much, and I'm going to have to apologize as well. Such is the nature of COP that I'm not even going to hear the panel, but I will be given a full report on what is said, what is discussed, and hopefully some of these shining examples that we all need. But I have to go to another event. Apologies. But thank you very much, and good luck to the panel.
Thank you very much. That was very inspiring, and you've taken many words out of my mouth, so that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, well, look, I'm chairing today's event. I'm Richard Smithers. I'm the Technical Director and International Lead on Climate Adaptation from Ricardo Energy and Environment. I'm also a Research Director of Climate Services for a Net Zero Resilient World, CS Now, which is a £5 million research programme commissioned by the UK government that aims to use the latest scientific knowledge to inform UK and global action. Is that better? Gosh, I hope you heard that. Now, in terms of today, you've heard some very inspiring words from Lord Goldsmith, and it does cover much of the ground that I was going to cover. I mean, science can provide a foundation for adaptation, a very important foundation. Everyone, from families, farmers and fishers to communities, companies and governments, require evidence to make informed decisions that enable us all to contend with and adapt to climate change, including extreme weather events. In order to plan effectively, we not only need information about weather and climate, as importantly, we need to understand the sensitivity of human and natural systems and assets to climate hazards, and the extent to which they may be exposed to them. So, for example, evidence on the sensitivity of crops to drought, homes to heat waves, and ecosystems and pathogens to warming. Furthermore, we need to know about how we can adapt, through evidence on adaptation solutions, including nature-based solutions, and their co-benefits and trade-offs with climate mitigation. Unfortunately, the magnitude and frequency and even synchrony of extreme events is already increasing, and it's clear we're going to have to take urgent steps to adapt, particularly when one considers that adaptation isn't something that can happen instantly. Its scope, its scale, and the fact that it can take as long as it takes a tree to grow and deliver benefits means that it's truly urgent now. While it may be vital to continue building and disseminating scientific evidence, we can't afford to wait. So we also need to make best use of expert and indigenous knowledge. In order for information to meaningfully support adaptation, it has to be relevant, tailored, and accessible. So, if scientific evidence is truly going to be salient, credible, and legitimate, then researchers need to work closely with those who need to use it. Our panel here today will explore best practice and real-world examples of how scientific evidence can be generated, tailored, and used at all levels to adapt to climate change, including extreme weather events. And as Lord Goldsmith said, we're very lucky to have who we have here today. On my left is Zachary Atheru, a manager in climate services at ICPAC, the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Centre. Dr. Katie Jenkins, a research fellow at the Tyndall Centre for Climate Research. Dr. Dharam Upreti, a climate and resilience lead at Practical Action in South Asia. And Helen Bai, who is head of international engagement at the UK Met Office and the senior officer responsible for the Weather and Climate Information Services Programme, WISER, that Lord Goldsmith mentioned. I guess it goes without saying that, we're not, any of us, UK government representatives, so nothing we say today will be a UK government view. These will be personal opinions, and perhaps all the better for them. So with that, I shall hand over to Zachary.
Thank you very much. My name, as you have been told, is Zachary Atheru. I work for IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center. It's a regional climate center accredited with WMO to provide climate services in 11 countries over Eastern Africa. I'm going to share best practice in use of climate information from regional level, linking to the local communities for applications. After or before the rainy season, we organize regional climate outlook forums where we bring national experts and regional experts together to provide climate guidance. After this, we help countries to downscale to national level. And for this case, we also downscale further to community level. So what we are doing is trying to see how climate information can be applied at local community. So we bring farmers together with the other experts in all sectors through participatory scenario planning, where the forecast is presented. They deliberate and they co-develop advisories for application by various sectors. We also bring in media in this participatory scenario planning. They work together with the users and they plan how they will be able to deliver updates throughout the season in collaboration with the local meteorological services. Through this exercise, farmers also are taught on how to diversify their livelihoods because in our region, many farmers rely on maize, and with the climate variability, the maize is not doing well. So through this, we have what we call farmer field schools, where they are taught on how to plant drought-resistant crops and also to diversify their livelihood by keeping poultry, beekeeping, and egg keeping as well. I think for now, I will stop there, then maybe I come later.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Zachary. Yeah, look, I mean, it's an amazing service that you provide, and in terms of both seasonal and short-term weather forecasts, what do you think is the difference in how that data is interpreted and used, given its different temporal nature?
Okay, thank you very much. Usually, the seasonal forecast is used to make strategic decisions. And the short-term forecast, like weekly forecast, is used for tactical decisions. At the beginning of the rainy season, the farmers need to plan when, what, and where to plant. So if the prediction is for wet season, the farmers decide to plant long maturing but high yielding crops. They can also decide to increase on acreage so that they can have enhanced production. If the seasonal forecast is for below average rainfall, the farmers can decide to plant short maturing but also low yielding crops, and also drought resistant crops, and also plan on to kind of irrigation. There is sand irrigation sort of where they have some small dams for irrigation. And then for the short-term forecast, like 1 week, the farmers decide when to do weeding, when to do spraying for diseases or pests, when to do pruning, So those are tactical decisions. So there's difference between the seasonal forecast and how they use the short-term forecast.
Thank you. Not doing well with my microphones, I don't think. Can you hear this? Oh, you can. Yeah, so no, it's very clear that your forecasts actually are very practical use, both in the immediate day-to-day, but also over the course of a season. So great. So Katie, would you like to present?
Thank you. Oh, is this one? Oh, yep, it's working. Great, so thank you very much. So I'm going to provide some insights from some work we've done on the CS Now project that Richard mentioned, where we've led the development of a searchable inventory of global climate impacts. And the ambition here was to make accessible some very large data sets that colleagues of mine at the Tyndall Centre had developed that looked at different climate-related risks for a range of different metrics, and how these risks would accrue with global warming levels of 1.5 to 4 degrees Celsius. And the metrics cover a range of different sort of themes, from drought, flooding, agriculture, biodiversity, to give a few examples. So really key to transferring this research into decision making was to work with the stakeholders and to try and bring them into the research process very early on in the project, and really focusing on co-production. So we had some very early meetings and co-production workshops where we allowed the stakeholders to actually sort of define the types of metrics that they wanted to focus on, the priorities, to tell us about the types of outputs and the units, and the functionality of the tool, how they could access this data, and, for example, the spatial scale as well. So, for example, we've developed the tool in Excel, which was viewed to be very simple to use. It didn't require any additional licenses or software or technical skills, but it could also be very easily shared across organisations and downloaded. Once we'd completed the tool, we also held a show and tell session, which I think was very useful to actually demonstrate in a practical sense to a range of different organisations and teams within those organisations how they could actually use this, they could visualise using it and begin to think about ways in which it would be informative and helpful to their work. So I think a real benefit from this was that we've ended up with a tool that's very easy to be interrogated. The users can actually pose their own research questions and then explore the data, access the data, download it, or use infographics in reports to help them answer their own sort of research questions or policy questions. And to do that using data that's consistent across countries and metrics as well. So a quick example of how it's been used since. So the UK's Climate Change Committee recently used the database, the searchable inventory, to support an external facing policy brief looking at climate vulnerability and how that would affect supply chains in the UK and abroad, and could easily access the data and interrogate it to help sort of underpin the key messages in that policy brief. Thank you.
Thank you. So beyond data on changes in climate variables, what other sort of data are needed to inform adaptation planning, do you think?
Yeah, yep. Oh, right. So yeah, in the inventory we have also included data on climate hazards that we've extracted from the IPCC's Working Group 1 Atlas. So we have information on the climate hazard itself. Many of our metrics focus on sort of climate-related exposure or the exposure to particular hazards. But it's also very important to think about the vulnerability of a particular system. In some cases, metrics do that, where we look at, for example, population and changes in population, but also the sensitivity of a system and the adaptive capacity. So we've tried to be very clear in developing the guidance that sits alongside the tool, and working with the stakeholders in developing that to ensure it's very clear that other types of data could be used, particularly if you're looking at a more local level, to support any sort of the interpretation of the data.
Katie. Durham. Thank you very much, Katie. Durham.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So, introducing myself, this is Dharam Upriti. I am from Nepal. I work for Practical Action, South Asia office, based in Kathmandu. So let me start saying, our motto, start small, big change. That means we demonstrate first, learn from that demonstration, and inspire others to work in any technology. So here I'm sharing you a successful example of early warning system that we demonstrated in 2002 to 2005 in one particular river. Then developing on, learning from that, working with, partnering with government, local communities, other stakeholders, from manual-based early warning system to today, I'm sharing about, SMS-based, technology-based early warning system that the government of Nepal has been sharing to the rickside communities. So that means we start working with communities, we learn from that, and then gradually it upscale and we inspire the government to work on it. Then since 2015, while we start working on flood early warning system, that flood early warning system in some rivers initially, then gradually evolving, we start making a polygon of different river systems, bringing communities, those who are at risk in that polygon, and then we partner with local national level telecommunication service providers. So there are 2 service providers in Nepal. Then we build partnership with them. We inspire government to make that partnership happen. Then now these 2 service providers, they are sharing SMS alert while any hazards, particularly the flood and erratic rainfall, when that hits any particular area, then local communities, they get SMS alert in their mobile phones. So what SMS alert, reaching to the community doesn't only work. So we work with communities. That means community network, community disaster management committee. We build their capacity to learn, to understand the level of risk. What does flood, what does rainfall that exceed 200 millimeter in 24 hours means? Then that will educate local communities via community disaster management committee. Then community disaster management committee is a kind of grassroots level network that communicates whatever the risk that coming up through their SMS, through their mobile phone, then they communicate to entire communities they are connected. So that means we are working with communities, building capacity, and working all 4 pillars of early warning system. Understanding risk, monitoring of risk, dissemination of risk, and then understanding those risks means building capacity so that the communities build their capacity and build their resilience. So that's all.
Very good. Durham, how do you ensure that the needs of women and girls and marginalized groups are met?
Yeah, fantastic question actually. We apply gender transformative approach in designing of the project and in implementation of the project. That means we ensure the dignity of women, marginalized peoples, and we ensure the risk-at communities are, moving in a safer area. That's why we ensure the disaster management committees ensure the participation of women at least 50% in executive committee, 50% in total assembly. So it's a kind of co-creation, bringing communities' voice, communities' concern, what's their needs, and build on their needs. We design the project, and then accordingly we implement the project. So that means gender transparency approach is a kind of end point from gender, orientation, sensitization, and then to the gender transformation. So women are the core in our, working, and we always give values. At least 60% of marginalized population comprises of women and other caste and ethnicity based on Nepalese culture. We ensure their participation in the system.
Brilliant. I'm very glad to hear it. That's great. Helen.
So thank you. Yes, I'm Helen. I'm Head of International Engagement at the Met Office. The Met Office, for those that don't know, is the UK's National Weather and Climate Research and Services Centre. And in 2016, UK government took a bit of a risk and decided to invest some funding into a new programme that was trying to do something a little bit different and put users at the core of developing services. And that became the Weather and Climate Information Services Programme. And we started with something we called the Quick Start projects, which I think was probably the wrong name to choose because it was anything but quick. These were 4 projects that were really sound concepts, but we soon came to realise actually a lot of the underpinning kind of infrastructure that was needed meant actually it was quite challenging to kickstart these projects in the way we had hoped. But we persevered and we had some fantastic results, and UK government decided to invest in a second phase. And some of those examples Lord Goldsmith gave of projects which really pioneered the co-production methodology, which we developed as part of the WISER programme. And this is, Zachary mentioned one example of this, is bringing together users and producers of information to really tailor advice and make sure that those that need information have it in the most accessible and impactful way that they can. So at COP26, UK government once again invested into the next round of WISER, and we've expanded not just the geography, but also the themes under WISER. So we have 3 programs running under the umbrella of WISER now, covering sub-Saharan Africa, covering the MENA region, and also a new program in WISER Asia Pacific. And the aim of all of these really is to improve the use and accessibility of weather and climate information services across the world. That's probably what I'll say on that for now.
Thank you. I mean, so the last point that you make really, I mean, a lot of the services here are at a local level. What are the challenges for you to taking that to scale?
It's a very interesting question, because to be able to deliver something that's really impactful and actionable, you need to be able to understand the needs of the groups that you're working with. So whether that's a marginalised group, a community by Lake Victoria, who we've supported through various projects. You need to really understand those needs, which means it needs to be tailored. So it is hard to scale in that sense because you're dealing with a very small group. However, what you can scale is the methodologies that you use. So you think about how those methodologies can be transferred to other projects and programs so that people aren't doing the same thing as we did and calling things quick start. And they can genuinely be quick start because we've learnt the lessons the hard way, and they can take some of the methodologies. So Lord Goldsmith mentioned the Adaptation Research Alliance and the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership. And these are really important platforms to enable us to share some of that good practice. So I sit as the chair of the early warning group for REAP, and we share there. We call it good practice rather than best practice because we're all still learning. So we have a platform which means any learning, any artifact, any biography, anything that we think might be useful for others that are starting this approach can really get together. And then platforms such as COP27. I've been to several COPs now. And when the first one I came to was only about 6 or 7 years ago, and we were still debating whether or not the science was clear. So just thinking how far we've come in terms of the science message, I'm hoping we'll do the same for action through the course of some of this sort of sharing. And in a couple of years' time, we'll look back and say, well, action is just clear, isn't it? this is what we need to do.
No, that's great. I mean, I'll ask the same kind of question that I asked Darren. So how does WISER take account of women and girls and marginalised groups and so on?
So gender equality and social inclusion is at the core of WISER. So we do target the interventions that we make to make sure that they are appropriate for the groups that we're working with. And that can be through all different types of mechanisms. So it could be thinking about bringing education into schools around climate risks that are evident in particular communities. So we're starting sort of with the youth in education systems. They can take messages home. We have other examples where we looked at, I mentioned Lake Victoria, there was a project called Highway, where we were aware that the fishermen on the lake were going out, even in pretty severe weather by our standards, because it was the livelihood that they needed to attain. And we put some new warnings around the lake, which were hugely successful, and we saved quite a number of those lives. So from 1,000 weather-related deaths on the lake, it's reduced by 2/3 in terms of recent numbers, so quite a significant thing. There was a secondary benefit from putting those warnings up, though, in that the local seaweed farmers were also using that information to be able to know when was the best time to go out and collect the seaweed. And this was a group we hadn't thought about targeting before, but it meant that a household had a double income, which is a fantastic result to have, really. So it's understanding the groups that you work with, understanding how to target, whether it's a disabled group, women and children at home, or any other type of marginalised group. And the informal settlements was another one Lord Goldsmith mentioned in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, where we worked very closely through the Daraja project to ensure people had the best information they could.
Brilliant. Okay. So, look, we've heard from all four of you. What do you think is the balance in terms of needs between the sort of evidence you provide in relation to extreme weather events and longer-term climate change? Where would you strike that balance?
Okay, thank you very much. With us at ICPAC, what we think is that the current climate variability, if we take care of climate variability, then it's like rehearsal on how to take care of the climate change. In our region, the most agreed impact of climate change, it is the increase in frequency and intensity of extreme events. So if we can be able to take care of this climate variability, then it means we can be able to cope with the climate change.
Yeah, no, I just think I'd reiterate that point and agree. I think it's dependent on the context, but having a balance is really important because we know in certain sectors there's already a lot of adaptation going on in the ground to deal with the sort of natural climate variability and historical sort of climate variability, and there's adaptation going on to start to address climate risks. But if you don't also take account of the longer term changes, then there's the potential for either maladaptation or for having incremental adaptation rather than a sort of transformative approach. So I think having a good balance is very helpful.
Brilliant, thanks for that. I've been involved in climate adaptation for about 25 years, and it used to drive me mad that people just focused on the long-term change. And of course, the long-term change is important, but needing to adapt to the immediacy of extreme events is also vital. Yeah, I mean, the other key question for me, and then I'll hand over to you to ask some questions because I've been doing a lot of asking, is how can you best convey all this information to your audiences?
first.
So, reaching to the wider populations, I think partnership and collaborations are really the powerful, approach. Media partnership with local media, national media, FM radios, and so these are the really, powerful one. And in addition that, we build simplified communication materials that goes to the entire communities. That means these communications are tailored to the needs of the local communities, how they understand those information, how they understand early warning, for example, early warning message, how they understand climate change, how they understand, deforestation and forest degradation and so things, how their ecosystem is degraded, how they understand that. So if we tailor that risk as the need and as the communities understand, I think that is what approach we have adopted, and we are communicating that to the communities.
For us, we have various levels. We have set up what we are calling user interface platforms. At regional level, we have regional Outlook forums. And at national level, we have national Outlook forums, which are held before the rainy season. Now, for communities, we have adopted the participatory scenario planning as another user interface to bring together the farmers, the NGOs there, the media, to work together to co-design and co-produce climate services. Then also media has been trained in reporting. So media also have been brought in, and they develop what you call seasonal media plan, where they plan on how to give updates to farmers every. Then they also translate in local languages in the 3 communities.
Thanks for that. For me, that was inspiring. I always worry about science being developed in a sort of vacuum and being left on a shelf. And it seems everyone here is very strongly into co-production and the importance of that building ownership and understanding, and which leads to action. Okay, so it's your turn now. Would anybody like to ask a question? Brilliant. And good luck with the microphone.
Hello, am I audible? Okay, yes. My question is, I can see the title as Science for Adaptation Action. How important, in your perspective, how important is the role of artificial intelligence in that? And why I say that, because I think when we talk about adaptation, a lot of farmers are adapting to the climate crisis. For example, the farmer which used to produce one crop might be producing some other crop because of the climatic conditions. Can we stop it? I'll tell you how. For example, if we install drones which can have the camera on top of it and which can do the computer vision, once they scan the crop, they can identify, okay, in the future what problems are going to come and how can we mitigate that. So do you think it should be science and technology for adaptation action? Just asking.
For us, we are beginning to use artificial intelligence in doing impact-based forecasting because we think that instead of address a bigger area, we need to link risk with the vulnerability and then data mining so that we can have impact-based forecasting. That's how now we are beginning to use artificial intelligence.
In our case, fantastic question, thank you. Initially river gauge reader used to read the manual, the level of river going in the bank of the river. That sometime took lives of those gauge readers. So what we did is, rightly you mentioned, artificial intelligence means we installed sensor that automatically detect the level of river, level of discharge in a particular river. When that level cross a certain threshold, that means like warning level, and then there are predefined warning level, above warning level, danger level, and above danger level. Then these are detected directly by the automatic telemetry systems, and that telemetry systems information goes directly fed into the government, early warning system website, and then the government, based on those information that are coming from the river, then they disseminate SMS message to the entire community. So just let me tell you, in 2022, 15 million SMS disseminated to the risk-aid communities because of the growing intensity of rainfall and off-seasonal rainfalls, in post-monsoon rainfall that are now common in South Asia regions. So just this year, we have disseminated 15 million SMS to the risk-aid communities. As a result, loss of lives is significantly decreased, but loss of asset, loss of infrastructure, loss of critical infrastructure, that is, is unavoidable. That is loss and damage.
Yeah, wow.
Just wanted to add, I agree with you entirely, it should be science and technology. I think from a Met Office perspective, we've been looking at emerging tech for a while and thinking about the role of artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital twins and things like that in the development of some of our climate science. I'm not a scientist or a technologist by background, so I'm not going to attempt to try and answer your question in any detail, but just to say I totally agree that it's going to play such a huge role as we move forward, as computing technologies evolve and our understanding of our environment and what's possible grows. So yes, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Pen Cabot. I'm Business Development Director at the Walker Institute, based at University of Reading. And I'm also a board member now of Resurgence, who are involved in REAP and WISER. I'm also not a scientist. I'm just going to caveat my question with that. But I'm having a look here at a recent article published in Climate Risk Management that says that important investments missing in early warning systems are in communication and response, as opposed to on the science side in the kind of forecasting space. So my question is really, what are the remaining and most pervasive barriers to communication and response when it comes to early weather warnings? And then I kind of have a second question following up from that around long-term sustainability of delivering these services. How does the panel see the financial kind of backing? Where does the panel see the money coming to fund these services in the long term? That's it, thanks.
Thank you very much. Two great questions. Who would like to go first?
I don't mind. You can start. I might take your second question first, because that's a slightly easier one. So I guess from a sustainability perspective, that's sort of what co-production is about. You're bringing users and producers together with a genuine need within the system, so within that nation's system. So the idea is not that ICPAC or KMD, so the Kenya Met Department, become reliant on the Met Office, but that they have the tools and the techniques to be able to sustain that project or service, product or service, for the long term. So we did a piece of it, we went back to those quick starts that weren't that quick, and had a look to make sure that those services are still being produced, and they are. And we haven't invested in those services now for almost 3-4 years. So it's fantastic to know that, and I think that's where co-production has a real benefit, because part of that process is to understand what is the exit strategy for the donor. How do you leave? How do you make sure it sustains? And if it doesn't, it might be that it wasn't the right service. Could be. And I think on your first question about the gaps, as I said, I'm not a scientist, and my colleagues at the back of the room might disagree with me on this one, but I guess in terms of communication and outreach, some of our examples have been that, and I think it's mentioned by one of the other panelists, that information to be communicated in a way that is actionable needs to be really in local dialects. It needs to be in a format that can be accessed. So is that via radio or SMS, whatever it might be. So there's lots of barriers still within sort of getting that communication, the end of the communication chain there. I wouldn't say we don't still need to invest in early warning systems then. I think the whole thing, it's a whole value chain and there are investments needed at every step. But for me, that's perhaps my reflection on your two questions.
Thank you very much. I think I agree on this because since 2009, when we are in this drought in our region, now we have another drought. The member states came and they came up with the IGAD Drought Disaster Resilient Initiative. We are talking of early action. The information is there, but while early action is not being taken. Now, with the time, we have realized that communicating early warning information is what is missing. But I think it's because of the mandate. People who issue early warning, they don't have the mandate to communicate. So we are missing the early warning protocol to say who communicate so that people can respond. Because most of early warning institutions are in meteorological services, and meteorological services cannot be able to tell people to respond. So what is required is development of early warning protocols. Who does what, when, so that then, and the ways to communicate. For example, in our region, you may need to make people leave their houses. You need to have this change with responsibility to those who have authority to make people leave in case of a disaster. So early warning protocol.
Thank you very much. I think actually I was going to say time for one more question, but actually I don't think we do. Yes? Okay. Would anybody else like to ask a question? Yes.
Thanks very much. My name is Rosalind West. I co-chair the Adaptation Research Alliance that we were talking about earlier, that bridges research and action. And so I was really interested in hearing from the panel. I thought it was great to hear earlier about the role of technology alongside science in informing adaptation action. But I was wondering if some of you could talk a little more about the role of the social sciences in understanding climate risk and in really helping to deliver effective weather and climate services. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Fantastic, actually. Yeah, let me tell you, risk, if you just understanding risk is the scope of both social science and physical science. So combination of both sciences together, that gives the ultimate results. If you just work on social science, that doesn't work. But if we build on social science, local perception, local knowledge, and how community perceive, how communities perceive risk, that is one scenario, and how those perceived risks actually link with science, that is another one. For example, if there is a landslide risk, so communities perceive, okay, this particular area is vulnerable to landslide, and then if we test the soil parameters and others, then that gives, this area is really vulnerable to science through the modeling. So combination of physical science and social science is a good marry to get ultimate better results, and that is what we are working in a citizen science approach. So citizen science approach is the core of early warning system. So community people, they understand what are the risks coming up, what are the hazards they are exposed with, and how they come up with those actionable plan. That could be adaptation plan or their community local disaster and climate resilience plan. So based on those plans, the local government invest on that. So that means social science and physical science are really important, and they should bring together.
Great. No? Yes?
Oh, thank you. No, but I think that was a great question, and just sort of to reflect on a similar point, I think in understanding risk, the sort of the vulnerability of the system is very important, and that can be sort of external to the climate risk itself. So I think really understanding, say, development, infrastructure, other components that are going on from other disciplines is really important in getting a better picture of the risk itself. And I think that's an area where the data is sometimes not as sort of well developed as for the hazards. I think it's getting better, but I think that's still something where it really needs to be brought into the risk framework in a much better way.
Actually, I'm going to break the rule and give my own little answer as well, because I lead a lot of adaptation planning, and I think the challenge often is trying to identify what the sensitivities are, which are the systems, which are the assets that are sensitive to what variables and why. And yes, science can certainly help, but they can be so local and so specific. Actually, expert knowledge and indigenous knowledge, a word that I have trouble saying, are really important. So actually involving people in adaptation planning, using the brilliant data that the people here and others produce, but helping them to actually interpret that within the context of their sensitivities, their adaptive capacities, what they know about the way that they will be exposed to those variables now and in the future is profoundly important. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was late for this talk because I was running across and getting trapped behind Nancy Pelosi, who was swarming around with other people, and so you couldn't get through. But I missed all the talks that I wanted to hear, but still want to pose a question. It's the so what question, and it's one that I don't know if you've already answered, so apologies if you have. But I'm Imogen Wood. I'm from the National Trust. We use a lot of Met Office data to understand our exposure and risk and so on. And what we look at is what is vulnerable that we look after, and that's assets and activity, people and infrastructure. But it's also, does it matter? And is there anything around, the things that are actually affected, and the so what question, which is being addressed in the vulnerability assessments?
Anybody like to answer that? I'll happily have a go at it. So I'm not absolutely sure that I certainly believe in the so what question. There is no point in science for science sake at this point. We have no time to waste. We really need to get on and adapt. We desperately need the sort of information that's available here. And the so what is because through use of that information, through helping people to express their sensitivities and exposure to the hazards that are being identified, they can also go on to identify ways in which they can reduce those sensitivities and reduce that exposure, or increase their adaptive capacities. And people are capable of doing that at all levels, from ministers and national stakeholders through to farmers and fishers and local communities. We work, Ricardo Energy and Environment, we work with all those kind of people. And it can be done, it is possible, and the most important thing is to spend as little time on that as possible to get on with action, meaningful action in the context of the information that is being provided through these kind of services. Does that answer your question? No.
Just very quickly, it does to an extent. I think the so what isn't like it's not that I don't believe in the need for all of that stuff. I think it's absolutely essential. It's the only way that we can address what we're doing, and you can't manage what you can't monitor and measure and so on. However, we have 28,000 buildings, 800 miles of coast, 250,000 hectares of land.
And so for us, prioritization is key, and charitable funds are key in terms of targeting them. So I just wonder if there is something around integrating a so what significance assessment into a vulnerability assessment, and whether that's being looked at all.
Would somebody like to answer
And
that?
I'll promise not
other
to.
than me? Yeah, go on, go on.
So I guess you're right, because at the moment, the amount of finance that's available to be able to look at every risk that exists in the system just isn't there. That's part of what the negotiations are about at the moment, limiting the growth of that change, but also thinking about where the finance comes from, and then how you prioritise within that. So I think I'll come back to co-production, because that's what I know. It's really understanding, well, what do you need from us? So we create the data, but how do we work together to make sure that you can act on that advice in a way that is meaningful to you? So it's not about one size fits all or a simple solution. It's working together, understanding what your needs are, understanding what the data can tell you, or maybe what it can't tell you. How do we really help you prioritize, whether it's the coastlines, the buildings, or both, or neither? Actually, it's something totally different. So I think that's probably the best way I can answer it.
Go on, Kate.
Yeah, just so from the global searchable inventory, I guess thinking about that so what question, one thing it can do is we've used a consistent sort of methodology instead of scenarios, so you can look across risks for a given country. And in some sort of earlier work, we had some presentations and workshops with various team members from the FCDO. In particular, we looked at Ghana and Egypt and Ethiopia. And in those cases, what they were interested in was the ability to use the data to say, well, which metrics, which risks or climate-related risks are very important in our context. It might not be the same as elsewhere, but in our context, where should we prioritise? But also, what are the benefits of limiting warming to 1.5 versus 2 or 3 for particular metrics? That's very different, and there are sort of, at what point do you cross a threshold that you really don't want to cross? So in that sense, I think really it can help prioritise where action should be directed.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we really do have to stop now. And I was just warming up, so thank you very much for coming. I think the panel have been brilliant. I think for me, a key message coming out of this session is the importance of co-production, the importance of making sure that data is actually relevant to the people who are going to use it, that the people who are going to use it are involved in its development, understand it, can use it to prioritize whatever it is they need to do, and really work out what that is. So, I mean, I think it's been very inspiring, and thank you very much indeed, and thank you for coming.